Good afternoon, Carl.
Hello, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, things are really good.
I have to admit, I for our episode here, I am missing a little bit. There's no blue couch in the background. It's like where has the couch gone?
The couch is still here. It's right over there. I just didn't have time before this episode to move it in some, like the one time we had it sideways.
Yeah, sideways, standing up, hanging from the ceiling. Well, I know it's going to be road tripping with you soon, right?
It got its first speaking request. The couch did. Yep.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
It's going to Jolt with me in Las Vegas.
Excellent. So I trust we'll see some pictures on Twitter, on social media.
Oh, Michael, you have no idea what sort of pictures you're going to see. I can't reveal all the secrets we have, but it's going to involve like intentionally trolling Michael Kitces with the blue couch is part of our intention.
Fantastic. All right. So we'll keep our eyes peeled for the blue couch as it makes its increasingly visible appearances on Twitter. So are you getting are they procuring the blue couch? Or are you literally like moving the couch from Utah to Vegas?
That thing's coming with me. Yep. I'm taking the blue couch with me. Yep.
Well, that's fantastic.
It is. My wife has agreed with the stipulation that there's a pretty steep licensing fee.
Oh, fantastic. So she's commercializing this.
Yeah, of course. She's like, if you're going to take my blue couch and let hundreds of people sit on it and take pictures so that you can put them on Twitter to troll Michael Kitces, there's a fee for that. And I was like, fair enough.
That seems fair.
Yeah.
So for our discussion today, I actually kind of wanted to follow on the theme of what we talked about last time. You had this great discussion around just aligning our capital with our goals, which then entails actually getting clear on our goals and like goal clarification over time, and sometimes having the hard, fire breathing, dragony conversations with clients about those moments where like I'm seeing you do a thing and it doesn't seem to be aligned to what you said was important. Has something changed? And I think, as you put it, like dancing with those dragons. But so we had a follow-on question that had come in that to me it sort of follows a similar dynamic in these balances that we have to go through in sort of trying to get to the right answer for clients and balancing against just the reality of client preferences and client preferences that change and sort of the murkiness of what our goals really are. So Jake had asked this question around how do you balance giving optimal advice to a client that might be more time intensive?
And Michael, clarify real quick, time intensive for who?
I think for the clients, like it's good, we're going to give them the advice, but it's going to take them a lot of time to implement it.
Yep.
Versus giving clients advice that is like, call it 80% optimal, but it's less time intensive. Sort of the implication being, so the client's more likely to actually do it.
Yep.
And I mean, to me, like there's a lot of interesting stuff that goes with this. There's sort of a whole discussion of sometimes the thing that we can determine is like financially optimal from all of our financial analysis. Like I can do that, but the client's gonna have to give up like 20 hours of their life to do all these steps, or I can get them, as Jake puts, like 80% of the way there and give them back a whole bunch of hours in their life. Yep. And there's just sort of that, to me, like that's basically an indirect expression of goals. Like clients don't just have a goal of like, dollars in financial achievement at best. There's dollars in financial achievement. There's the time that I'm willing to put towards that. And if you ask more of me in time to get to the financial goal, I might not do it because that's not how I actually weigh my time relative to my financial goals. So I thought like there's one interesting theme there from Jake, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on it. But there's also just a higher overarching challenge to me around this, which is there are times where we can get to a point of, I've analyzed your situation and here's exactly what the financially optimal path would be. And it's going to take so much, I know you're not going to do it. And so as the advisor, as a professional, I just get to this sort of, to me, awkward moment. Like, do I knowingly recommend suboptimal advice that I think they'll do, and then wait for like some future advisor to come across this and go, what was that guy Kitces thinking? I can't believe he recommended this to the client because it's not optimal. Or, do you, I don't know, as I think, like, get on our professional high horse and say like that, this is my recommendation. If you're not willing to do this, you're not my client. And I do know a lot of advisors, like, if you're not going to implement my recommendations, like, you can't be my client. I don't want to work with people who don't take my advice. So there's sort of these two dimensions. Like, there's how do you handle the complexity of goals when sometimes there's financial dynamics and there's time dynamics, not just of like aligning capital with goals, but just like, was my client going to take the hours to do those transfers and make the separate accounts to do the splitting thing we're going to do? And at what point is it okay to give knowingly suboptimal advice because at least the client will do it?
Yeah. So good. I mean, I think it's really interesting that, first, I'm super curious about, because I am an 80%er by just like nature, like I'm only interested in getting to 80%. I don't even care about, like, there's not anything in my life where I've cared about the difference between 80 and 100%.
Oh, you're just making me weep now, Carl.
I know. That's why I'm interested in your take on this, because I know you're the opposite. And Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, calls it the joy of being an 80%er. And he was talking about outdoor activities. Like, he's an 80%er fly fisherman. Like, I'm 80%. I'm like 80% skier, 80% kayaker, 80% climber. And I have lots of friends that are 100% of those things. I don't have any friends who are 100% of all of them, but I have some friends who are 0, 0, 0, 100%, and I've just always, I felt really good when I finally realized that's what this was about, was like, being 80%er. But how does that make you feel? Like, how do you approach, and then we'll get to your question, but I would imagine if a client asks you a question, you are going to take the time to give them the absolute, like, you care about the last 10 basis points.
Oh, yeah.
And does it just, like, I can't even imagine not caring about the last 10 basis points.
Oh, just makes me weak, Carl. So again, like, I'm just reflecting back. I think this is, well, like a lot of things, like, this has evolved for me as the years have gone by.
Right.
Early in my career, like, I think I very much would have been in the, like, I analyzed the heck out of it. Like, this is the best solution. If you don't want to do this, then like, you're just not a good client who doesn't get it. Right. You don't get it. You don't see, like, I gave you the answer. Your life will go so much better. Your finances will go so much better.
I can save you.
Do this thing. Yeah. Well, I honestly, I think that probably was a piece of it deep down. It was like,
Sure.
50% I can save you, and the other 50% is like, why can't you see the great advice that I'm giving you? Because, I want to feel good about an advice. Like, why won't you recognize all this great advice I'm giving you? You're not even taking it. So part of it, to me, from my end, I feel like it's been an evolution from sort of starting there to at least getting to this acknowledgement of, look, like, there's a strategy that we can pursue here. I'm thinking back to a scenario we had, I guess, a bunch of years ago now, of back when we could do Roth conversions and recharacterizations. There was a whole tax strategy where, like, the simple version is you convert their account into a Roth early in the year, and then you can wait the whole 12 months of the year and well into almost 10 months the following year into the recharacterization window. If the account goes up, you keep the Roth conversion. If the account goes down, you recharacterize it and you do it again. The fancier version of that.
That's the simple version.
That's the simple version. Come on, Carl. Like, we're
whatever you say, brother.
The complex version was no. Like, we're going to split your account up into 4 or 5 different buckets. So we're going to make one bucket that's just like large cap stocks. And we'll see if those go up. And if they do, we keep it. If they don't, we recharacterize. Then we're going to make another bucket for small caps. So we're going to make another bucket for international, make another bucket for real estate, and another bucket for commodities. And so I'm running like 5 different horse races at once. If anything goes up, you keep the conversion. If it goes down, you recharacterize it and do it again. And just like the more ways you split this, the more economic opportunities you had to win, with the small caveat that client has to make like a new account for each of these. There, frankly, was work on us as well as the client. Like, you got to make new accounts. You got to handle like the transfers. We got to journal money back if it doesn't work out. There's a whole bunch of stuff to track. You're going to get like more logins. You're going to get more paperwork. You're going to get more statements. We're going to have to really have a longer conversation with your CPA at the end of the year in order to talk through this. And just, we would have clients that we would present this strategy to, and some of them are like, this is awesome. Like, I see the vision and the dollars. Like, what a cool wealth maximizing thing. For anyone who's listening, you can't do this anymore. They changed the recharacterization rules a few years ago. So unfortunately, it doesn't work. Just happened to be a good example in context. Yeah. So some clients are like, well, like, this is so cool. Our advisor, we've never had an advisor that talks about this. I mean, like, we won client opportunities off this. We generated real dollars off this. And then other clients, like, just their eyes would glass over. Usually before I even got to the end of the really cool explanation, because it was a really cool explanation, had like charts and like bubble drawings and everything. Like, their eyes would glass over, just clear, like, there's no way that you're going to, like, you're not going to do this. Like, you're just seeing the account and the paperwork and like the new things you're going to have to do. Like, it was just clear they weren't going to do it. And so, maybe they wanted to do the Roth conversion, but not like the fancy multi-account splitting recharacterization thing. And me, it was just like, it kind of crystallized one of those scenarios. I lived this over and over again of some people wanted to do the complex thing and maximize their wealth to the nth degree, and others just weren't going there. Like, we'll just convert your account and we'll unwind it if it doesn't go well. Was an 80% solution.
Yeah.
And some clients were just willing to go there. Some clients wanted the 100%er, and some clients wanted the 80%er. And I at least from my end, I guess for better or worse, like, I felt fine about it, because at least I presented the 100%er. Like, I told you about it. I gave you your fair swing. If you're going to choose not to do it for that trade-off, like, I gave it my best shot. We'll do the thing you want to do. And it just, I guess, just like from my personal, I don't know, professional as a professional guilt, professional provide, and like, I did present it, I did show it, but I would point out, like, but if this feels like a bit much for you to go through what it takes to do this, here's the alternative version that's a little bit simpler.
Yeah.
And got comfortable with the fact that clients would take some of each, but at least from my end, like, I had to present all the options. Like, I couldn't not present them, even, and I mean, more than once. Like, it was with a client I knew, like, existing relationship. I knew they weren't going to do it.
Right.
I still felt compelled to have the conversation. Maybe that's my own neuroticism that I didn't really need to do it, because at the end of the day, I probably wasted their time because I knew they weren't going to do it. But I presented the conversation. I gave them the chance. I had plan B there and could show them, and then they would quickly choose plan B and we would move on.
Right. There's so much there to break down that I think is so cool. One is just, I love hearing you describe that, because I'm sure there's plenty of people listening, especially people who are really familiar with your work, that feel the same way, right? That are like, I gotta do this thing and I gotta maximize everything. And that there might be a few people that feel a little bit more like me, just like, I mean, my eyes glazed over at the simple solution, and I'm a financial planner. And
I know I lost you on the simple one. And we're like, no, I haven't even gotten started yet.
Let alone a client, right? So it, like, know that this desire to optimize comes from good, well-intentioned desire to be helpful, right? So, but with that, let's just talk real quickly. I think, like, we should be clear about the best advice is the advice that will get implemented. Like, full stop, right? The best advice is what will get implemented. And that is a dance, and you pointed to that dance a bunch, right? Like,
yeah.
And so then that second thing you did, which I think is really interesting, right, is just pointing to the fact sometimes it's important. Sometimes it's important for people to be aware that that there's a much more like robust, optimal, complicated solution. And depending on the dance that you're doing, you'll know whether or not, like, the degree to which, I think of it as like, I mean, we could just be stereotypical for a minute, like an engineer, like I may need to go a little bit more into the complex details with an engineer, not because they don't trust me, but because they like to know some of the details. And so sometimes one of the solutions to this competition thing could be, I mean, I don't know that I ever did this, but well, no, sometimes I did. I remember printing out, we used to do large portfolios we would do in a single fund, like the dimensional, global equity fund or whatever, that was 60% equity, 40% fixed income. It was one fund, and there would be lots of money in the one fund. And sometimes people would be like, one fund? And we all know that that's really sliced into 17 different funds, and you own like 17,000 positions. And so at one time I actually printed out the kind of holdings, and it was like 2 inches thick.
Yep.
And I got it bound, and I would just occasionally pull it out of the drawer and just kind of drop it on the table, when we were talking about one fund, and be like, that's, this is just purely because
I love that.
It's internally rebalanced. It's, I know you'll behave best with this one fund instead of me calling you and rebalancing, like all those things.
I think it's just a good tip for anyone who's listening. Like, if you use a relatively small number of like very diversified funds, and clients keep saying, but it seems like there aren't that many funds, like, print out a whole list of holdings, bind it, and be able to thunk it on the table.
I used to think it was just the impact of the drop, just boom. And I would even say sometimes, like, I'm happy to go through this with you if you'd like, but just let me make sure, like, I'll go toe to toe with anybody on the investment process. You could go 17 years looking under every rock, and you will not find a better way to invest than this, right? Like, I feel like we have to have that conviction. So either we're just having that conviction, like, hey, I want you to know this seems like a relatively simple solution, but it's the solution on the other side of complexity. And I'm happy to take you through all that complexity if you want, but most people don't want to go through it. Like, just like most people, when they get a prescription from a doctor, do not really want to know anything about the science, the academic literature, the experiment, the tests, all that stuff, the FDA approval. They don't want to know that stuff. They just want to know, Yep. And so the degree to which we have to prove that we know, but let's keep one thing clear about this. The best advice, the only advice worth anything, is advice that actually gets implemented. And so the other way to approach this would be to say, here's the complex thing, here's where we're headed. I'll give you a brief description of this, and then I'm going to break it down for you. It may take us 18 months to get there, but no, we're headed that direction, because we're going to do this first, and this first, and this first, and this first. So then you're sort of a little bit covered. I was never particularly worried about another advisor. I mean, it happened to me. I remember specifically, I'll give you the example. I had a client who, when we met, we used to ask in the first meeting, in an ideal world, how often would you like to communicate? How often would you like us to communicate? And I had this one client, we'll call him Dr. Terry. Dr. Terry spent a lot of time fly fishing and mountain biking. And I remember he was like, in an ideal world, I would never hear from you. And I was like, that's really cool. So I took him at his word.
Yeah.
And then maybe a year or two later, we got transfer paperwork going to I think I might have told this story before. We transfer paperwork going to a firm that I won't name, but starts with an F, and they swim in the sea. And I called and said, you can't move there, right? Like, if you need a different planner, I'll help you, but I'm not going to let. And he's like, can you do that? I'm like, yeah, I'm not allowing you to move there. I said, but what's up? He said, well, I never hear from you. And that was
told me not to.
That was the lesson that I learned, that we do have to sometimes thunk things on the table.
Yeah.
We do have to sometimes say, I know. We do have to sometimes demonstrate that we're on top of it. Because a lot of us are like, hold the course, stay. We're making this super simple. And we don't point often enough to the complexity we went through. But in the end, I think we have to remember that the most important, the most complicated advice that doesn't get implemented is worthless.
Yeah,
so that's that dance.
Well, I mean, to me, the other part of the dance, well, is I guess two other things that come to mind to me in this balance in the dance. One, like, and at least for me, part of why I still felt compelled to, I guess, to do that part of the dance, like to talk through the strategy. And here's the thing is, look, I know when I've been out there to try to win business, we try to come to the table with some creative ideas and strategies. To me, like, one of the best things I can hear in a prospect meeting is, I've never heard that from the advisor I work with.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, like, I hear that, I'm like, this is going well. Like, you're seeing things that you're not hearing from your current advisor. That means you're seeing new opportunities and working with us. Like, this is a prospect meeting going well. If I ever hear that come out of a prospect's mouth. And so, I just always attune, like, I don't want my client, who I know at some point is going to sit across from another advisor, either professionally or socially, like something's going to come up, someone may get pitched. I don't want my client to hear that. Like, I don't want my client to say that. I don't mind them saying, oh yeah, my advisor told me about that. I didn't want to do it. It was too much of a hassle. Like, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I want them to say, I've never heard that before, because now I'm the road, like, you're not going to do it with the other advisor, because I know you wouldn't have done it with me. But if I made the decision that you're not going to do it with me, and therefore I'm not going to tell you about it, when someone else tells you about it and makes it sound really cool, I'm at risk to lose you, even if you go there and then never do it there. Because the perception was that I wasn't bringing it to the table. I think in the similar context to what you said, like, the client said, I don't want to hear from you. But the truth is, the client wanted to hear from you and then be able to blow you off and not take your call. But it still mattered whether you were calling. And in a similar manner, like, I may know the client's not going to pursue this strategy. I still feel like I bring value to the table by putting it on the table. So there's, I mean, I do agree with sort of this framing of the best advice is the advice that gets implemented. But I would say, like, the recommendations that don't get implemented still have value. I think that's the corollary that goes with it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm just going to ask you to be super honest about this. And there's a little analogy here. Like, there's a lot of concern about getting eaten by a shark when you're out swimming in the ocean, but it actually doesn't happen very often.
Nope.
Right. It's really dramatic.
I mean, most of us right now, our business, I mean, we have very high retention rates, right? 90 plus, some firms are 95, 97.
So how often did you actually hear either from a client, hey, I heard from this other person that they're doing this amazing thing, or in a prospect meeting where you're like, well, my advisor never talked to me about that. And in fairness, we have to say, like, and the work was relatively good. Like, almost every advisor prospect meeting I had, like, this thing's blown up, but relatively good work. How often, I guess the better question is,
I mean, how often do we lose clients? Like, how often do we lose clients?
That's the better question. Yeah. How often did you lose clients for that?
God, probably two, I think I can think of. I mean, very, very rarely, I guess, but again, with the caveats, like,
you were going complex with all of them. Yeah.
Well, and just like, look, I don't like lose anyone. It hurts. And it's very, the rejection's very scarring, right? I mean, just for the worst, like, yeah, I remember pretty intimately the people who fired me, particularly that I thought I had a good relationship with, right? Like, sting, you remember that a long time. And just for better or worse, like, pain teaches you lessons. And so, I guess, including sometimes lessons we learn a little bit more than we really needed to learn, because pain's just sometimes sharp that way. That was, having not many experiences like that was still a few too many that made it pretty scarring. I guess, just for better or worse, like, we won a good amount of business that way. So no, the strategy works. Now, maybe that's because we were specialized that way, talking to clients, talking to prospects who had advisors who were not that focused. That's why we were winning some business. But, I think there's just an effect, like, we inflict this on ourselves. The ways you win business tend to also be the ways that you're most afraid to lose business, right? Like, if you If you differentiate on expertise, you're afraid someone else is going to come in with deeper and different expertise. If you differentiate on your price, you're worried that someone's going to come in with better pricing. Like, however it is that we show up, I think it's just sort of natural for us. If I can win clients this way, I could be at risk to lose clients this way. And if that's what I usually take my conversations to when I'm winning business, I really want to make sure I don't lose on the same terms. So I don't know, like maybe that's my own neurosis of that I carry with it, but I feel like I see that as a pattern for us that, losing any client's pretty scarring. And I mean, to be fair, like it's going to happen. I mean, I've certainly we've had more than 2 clients leave the firm over the years. Just I'm remembering 2 that had this kind of circumstance associated with it. But, losing clients are scarring. And so for better or worse, I think most of us, you lose a client, you start looking over all the things you did in the relationship and second guessing it, maybe sometimes unjustly and sometimes justly. But I don't feel like I need to lose a lot of clients to this to still be concerned about still getting credit for the recommendations that don't get implemented because they still have value for bringing the idea to the table.
Yeah, no, that's all fair enough. I'll just give you sort of a slightly different perspective that I'm sure I'm wrong about. And I'm, please know that it may not apply to any of you. It's fine. But I would love to think, so 2 things. One, Jason Fried at Base Camp has this interesting phrase where he says, don't scar on the first cut. Right. So, and his point is if something doesn't happen all that rarely, or at least the first time it happens, we may want to be aware of it. We don't need to build whole new systems into every behavior ever, because it may never happen again. And that's an interesting point. But secondarily, and more importantly, I like to think that I like to think about building relationships that, because there was no way to protect against everything.
Right.
I like building a relationship. I'd like to think of my client, if somebody said, oh, what, you're not doing that? I had a client tell me this once. And again, it was only 1 client, but I would love to think that every client said this, was just no, if that was important for me, Carl would have told me. Because I can't be there all the time, right? Oh, you should be buying gold. Well, did Carl walk me through why I shouldn't be buying gold? So I love the idea of can we get so clear? And to me, it would be the only way to solve this problem, at least in my mind, the only other way to solve this problem would be to diagnose so thoroughly, right? To have given somebody, to have somebody know to be so convinced that you understand them better than anyone else, that they just know, if that was important, and that takes time and work, but I would put my work there in hopes, and this is a competing idea, and I'm going to drop the 2-inch thick book on the table every once in a while. Right. And so I think that's the beautiful dance. That's the art of what we do. Again, we've talked in the past about punches in the face and empathetic hugs. We're talking about elegantly simple and deeply complex. And it's probably an and, not an or.
So I guess the one thing I have to ask quickly, just as we can come up on time and wrap the conversation, I do worry sometimes this sort of framing, the best advice is the advice that gets implemented. I can come at this from the very constructive way, sometimes the 80% solution the client implements is better than the 100% solution where their eyes just glaze over and then they don't do anything. But I've seen over the years, at least the client will actually implement it, has been used as a justification for a lot of really bad recommendations.
Amen.
And really questionable stuff. I'm remembering back to starting out in the insurance world and having a conversation with one of the advisors there who just everything was a permanent life insurance sale.
Right.
And asked him, just because I was learning about mutual funds and saving into retirement accounts. It's why wouldn't you open a retirement account for the client? Use American funds. Everybody else in the firm was using American funds, but he was, permanent whole life insurance for absolutely everything. And, and his explanation was basically, well, a lot of people screw up and they don't stick it out in their investments, and they don't always save every year. But you know what? No one forgets the premium on their life insurance policy. This is basically like a forced saving strategy. And all my clients have built up significant cash value because they don't want to fail the premium notice that comes through. And so, like, I'm not trying to open the whole can of worms of, are there ever times you might use permanent life insurance as an accumulation vehicle? We can do that conversation for another day, but suffice it to say, this person was doing it in a much broader context than the scenarios that you might rationalize this for. Like this was like, when your only solution is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Like, this was his answer for everything. And I'm quite certain it was not right for everyone, even if we're going to debate whether it's right for anyone. And his rationalization was a loosely paraphrased version of, well, the best advice is the advice that gets implemented. And my clients, when they get that forced savings premium notice, put their money into the life insurance policy.
Yeah.
And that was how he rationalized it, and slept very well at night.
Yeah. And I mean, what's interesting is, number one, given that person's skill set, he's not wrong. That's a skill set problem. Like, you don't know how to help people behave with other more efficient vehicles. And so that's
interesting. That's framing. That's a skill set problem. So
I mean, it could be, I'm being generous in my assumption. Like, maybe it's just flat out, I have the skill, but I just want to make more money, whatever. I don't know. But I'm thinking, because I was thinking through, like, I remember an experience with that exact, I knew that was the example you're going to bring up. And I'm glad you brought it up, because I'm making an assumption about this audience. And I think it's really good to clarify that I'm making an assumption about this audience, that we're not playing that game, that we're thinking the best advice is the best advice that will also get implemented. And we're always trying to optimize both of those things. But it is interesting when we think about, I know of examples where that has actually been true, where, neighbors and friends have been always chasing the best, most efficient thing and the best thing. And then one other neighbor, I can remember specifically, a dentist, who was like, my guy told me to buy whole life for 30 years and I got more money than any of my friends. Well, could that advice? Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good example, but could that same person have had twice as much if they had been slightly more efficient in their suggestion? Yes, we all know that. So I often think of that as a skill set. That advisor didn't know how to help people behave using other tools. And that's probably being generous, given the circumstance you're pointing at, is it was probably just because they wanted to sell a policy that paid them a bunch of money. So all that's to say, I think you and I are talking to people who are saying the best advice is the best advice, that would also actually get implemented. And if I can't get people to behave with, for instance, I mean, we may know, I think we kind of know, and if we even bring this up, we're going to get into the weeds, so let's not get there, but we may know dollar cost averaging. It's a great example. Like, and dollar cost averaging, we know dollar cost averaging is statistically an inefficient way to invest money.
Yeah. Market goes up more often than it goes down. It is mathematically better to just dump it in and pray it works out. It works out more often than it doesn't. Absolutely.
So dollar cost averaging actually is not a spreadsheet solution. It's a behavioral solution.
Yeah, it's a regret minimization solution.
Yeah, and that's a really good example of a righteous trick that might be a good example of something that we do that is not the best advice on the planet, but it's what will actually work over time. So that's a good example, but you are pointing to an example where we could take that too far and go, yeah, nobody does this ever because they're all dumb. So we just buy whole, whatever.
So I think that's a good way to frame it in wrapping it up, that, so takeaways for me, like the best advice is the advice that gets implemented. Recommendations that don't get implemented still have value. I think we can acknowledge that. Yes, we have a burden to try to give the most optimal advice that we can. It's okay if the optimal advice, if the clients can implement the thing that's not optimal, if they're going to implement it. But that doesn't alleviate the pressure on us to say, are you sure there isn't a way you could up your own game and your own skill set to get to the point where you could get the client to actually implement the more optimal thing? And that's, I mean, like, that's a nice way to, I don't know, to challenge ourselves to say, is there a way we can lift our own skill sets to get to the point where we can get the client to do the thing that's even more optimal?
I love that. Like, to me, that points to just, can you become a better chess player? Right? You actually stink at chess. So can you get better?
Yeah.
And I mean, the other phrase I like to use for that is like, can you become a better righteous trickster? Like, what righteous tricks can you pull off, as opposed to bait and switch, right?
Yeah.
Like, righteous tricks are in service of the client. Can you get better at pulling righteous tricks that help the client be more efficient? And that's a whole game. It's my favorite game that goes on behind the scenes of like, okay, how do I help this client? And there's no, obviously, there's no rule of thumb for that. It's like, well, this client is going to just invest the whole pool because they can handle it. This client, we're going to dollar cost average over 6 months. This one, we may dollar cost average over 12 or 24 months because that's as close as I can get. Can I get any closer? What can I do here? Like, do they need to take 10% to Robinhood just to get this out of their system? Like, don't lose the war just because you want to win a battle, you know? So I think that's the beauty of all of this. So I love that framing at the end, like, just get better at playing righteous tricks.
All right. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you, Carl.
Super fun, Michael. Thank you.
Absolutely. Enjoy your trip with the blue couch.
Amen.